So hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar with Coastal Restoration Society. I'd like to start things off just by acknowledging that this virtual event is being hosted in Mi'kma'ki, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the Peace and Friendship Treaties of 1725, and these treaties did not deal with surrender of the land, but they did set out the rights and responsibilities that settlers and Mi'kmaq people owe to one another. So that being said, we are all treaty people. My name is Cass, and I'm currently the network coordinator for the Nova Scotia Environmental Network. So NSEN is a network of about 45 environmental organizations across the province whose common purpose is to conserve and enhance the natural environment and build a sustainable future for Nova Scotia. So as an environmental network, we strive to support, strengthen, and promote the environmental work of our members by connecting them to each other, to governments, and to the public. So tonight, we're very happy to welcome our guest speakers from Coastal Restoration Society. CRS was founded in 2017 and specializes in industrial scale environmental restoration initiatives, mobilizing projects from headwaters to coastlines with an emphasis on developing long-term strategic partnerships. So 2023 marked CRS's first season of restoration work in Nova Scotia. And this is thanks to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Ghost Gear funding allocated to address the damage and fishing gear loss that resulted from Hurricane Fiona in September last year. So tonight we have Ghost Gear Project Lead Rheanna Drennan, Health and Safety Coordinator Peter Clarkson, and Indigenous Engagement Lead Earl Hope. Our guest speakers are going to discuss the origins of CRS, the importance of centering Indigenous knowledge and restoration efforts, and CRS's successes and aspirations surrounding restoration projects here in Nova Scotia. So with that, I will hand it over to our presenters.
Thanks, Cass, and thanks, May, for putting the screen up there. You kind of took my thunder out, Cass. Pretty well had my whole introduction there, but so thank you. And so thanks to the network for hosting us. It's a real pleasure to be here on behalf of Coastal Restoration Society. My name is Pete Clarkson, and I'm here with my colleagues Earl Hope and Rheanna Drennan. And it's a real pleasure to be here, and looking forward to this presentation and questions afterwards. So hopefully this is just the start of a much longer term relationship. So as Cass said, we're going to provide a brief overview of CRS and who we are, where we came from, how we operate as an organization, and finally some of the results from this summer's Ghost Gear Retrieval Project. So my name is Pete Clarkson. I'm the Health and Safety Coordinator for Coastal Restoration Society. I live in Tofino, out on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, on the unceded traditional territory of the Tloquit First Nation. I was previously a National Park Warden for 35 years, including 20 years, last 20 years at Pacific Rim National Park out on Vancouver Island. And I had the great pleasure of spending the past 6 months in beautiful Nova Scotia, which I will forever remember as the land of the lawnmower. So, next slide, please. So CRS, we were founded in 2017. We're a diverse group of former and current resource workers, construction industry personnel, government workers, Indigenous community members, fishers, loggers, park workers, fishery staff, aquaculturists, wildfire fighters, and even whale watching guides. Our knowledge of these industries motivated us to come together to bring the collective experience and knowledge to bear on finding solutions and addressing the impacts from these historical industries, while also embracing more traditional stewardship practices through the support and full participation of Indigenous community members. We recognize the real need to form boots on the ground coalition between Indigenous communities, industry, and government partners. Our recipe for success, I would say, is to bring a collaborative approach that marries traditional Indigenous stewardship values with cutting-edge science, technical skills, and colonial industrial interests to come up with large-scale restoration solutions that offset impacts from our recent past activities. Next slide, please. We started in 2017 as a small group of people, initially focused on marine debris removal because we recognized it was having a large-scale impact on our shared environments and was compounded at the time by the aftermath of the Japanese Tohoku tsunami. Next slide, please. I was working at Pacific Rim at the time of the tsunami, and of course it was a terrible disaster to witness, and it was game-changing for me personally. I was very involved in cleanup efforts on the coast here at the time, organizing all small-scale volunteer efforts, and getting frustrated by the lack of resources and the growing impacts from marine debris on our coastlines. It was evident back when I first moved here in the 1990s, and it was increasing more and more. And we were doing lots of small-scale volunteer cleanups, but nothing that was able to access the remote areas where most of the material was collecting and continuing to collect and accumulate. So it was quite, this became a real touchstone for us because it fostered a game-changing legacy in the marine debris extraction world for a variety of reasons. One, it affected the whole Pacific Ocean and the entire coastline in British Columbia. It brought together many different organizations and governments to organize large-scale marine debris cleanups. And we received $1 million funding from the Japanese government in Canada, 5 million in the United States, that finally provided the resources to access these remote areas to remove thousands and thousands of kilograms of debris that have been accumulating after the tsunami and prior to that for many, many years. It was an exciting time, I have to say. We were so many committed and passionate people and multitude of organizations here on the coast. We were literally writing the playbook as we went along, because there wasn't any standard framework for organizing these large-scale complex cleanups that address the challenges of, one, working safely in a remote natural environment, or how to work in conjunction with numerous communities, Indigenous nations, user groups, governments, industry, heavy equipment, helicopters, all in a dynamic, ocean and weather environment. To say it was a somewhat organized chaos during that cleanup, the aftermath, but we learned a lot of valuable lessons. Next slide, please. These lessons became the building blocks for creating standardized frameworks and processes that CRS could employ to help guide us in our goal of keeping staff safe. These safety frameworks encompassed a full suite of occupational health and safety standards that were more traditionally associated with industrial projects. And these type of things included like standard operating procedures, safe work procedures, training and certification standards, providing project orientations, conducting daily tailboard meetings, ensuring mandatory reporting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. Developing and implementing these frameworks allowed us to expand our efforts and to effectively organize larger and larger groups that could be deployed across the country to work in these complex, challenging natural environments, while also ensuring that we had the fundamental skills and training to meet the health and safety requirements, and also understood how to work safely and cooperatively together as a team. We have now successfully deployed teams of up to 100 people on cleanups in remote areas. To maintain that, we need to continue to emphasize and invest in creating these frameworks so that they can be employed on a variety of scales, from the removal of a single derelict vessel to the collection of hundreds of thousands of kilograms of debris after a hurricane. Next slide, please. Some of the things that we now incorporate in these frameworks include occupational first aid training, how to handle hazardous goods, how to safely interact with wildlife, how to travel on rugged coastal terrain, operating and crewing commercial vessels, assessing ever-changing weather and ocean conditions, all while potentially navigating floods, fires, earthquakes, hurricanes, and even tsunamis. We're also working with a tremendous amount of industrial equipment, including helicopters, tugs and barges, excavators, commercial vessels, and power tools. And we have to ensure that staff know how to use and interact with all that equipment safely. Next slide, please. Inclusive of these foundational skills is ensuring that staff are prepared for emergencies, have the ability to recognize natural hazards, and the confidence and support to speak up, and the skills and equipment to respond in the event of an emergency. Next slide, please. These combined experiences have been the catalyst for developing these frameworks that we now employ on a day-to-day basis on all our projects. They really contribute to how CRS has been successful in bringing this all together. I like to call it baking the safety cake. When staff see that you're investing in their personal safety, investing in periphery actions necessary to keep them and even their communities well supported, it fosters a culture that they take a lot of pride in. They're often the first to acknowledge that CRS has made these contributions to their personal safety and to periphery supports to their personal and professional well-being. By doing so, we've somewhat organically created a landscape where people love to come to work every day. They're engaged in meaningful restoration work that's having a positive impact on the environment. And when people are contributing to environmental stewardship, it creates momentum and enthusiasm from every single person in the organization to get up, want to participate in these activities despite the complexity, despite the inherent dangers that are involved, because they know they're making a positive difference as an individual and as part of a team. Next slide, please. We've talked about the frameworks and how to take care of people, how we created policy and supports to keep those people safe in these complex projects. What we need to talk about next is one of the most fundamental facets and tenets of our organization. Acknowledging that all the areas we work in are within the traditional territories and often unceded territories of Indigenous communities. To be successful in these projects and on these lands, we must work hand in hand with our Indigenous partners to make sure we're asking what the priorities are for those governments and those communities, and how we can preserve and support the food security and cultural touchstones so closely tied to environmental restoration. That we don't just show up at the beginning and the end. We don't just ask for a letter of support. We meet with the community in person and continue that engagement from the very beginning to the end of the project. Absolutely critical to our mission and a fundamental tenet of our CRS's success is that we work hand in hand with our Indigenous partners from start to finish. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Mr. Earl Hope.
Thanks, Pete. Hello, everybody. As mentioned before, my name is Earl Hope, and I am the Indigenous Engagement Lead for CRS here in Nova Scotia. I live in Yarmouth. I've been living here for most of my life. I am originally from Labrador. I'm Inuit from Labrador, which will always be home to me, of course. So So thank you so much for coming out tonight to witness our presentation. And yeah, let's get into it, and from the Indigenous perspective. So Indigenous people first. So CRS supports the resource management and environmental stewardship goals of Indigenous partners. We have formalized this through our Indigenous peoples first mandate, ensuring that meaningful employment and contract opportunities are provided to local Indigenous people first. So this is very important factor that CRS takes very serious in doing the work that we do. And honestly, it was a big factor for me making the decision to take on the employment with Coastal Restoration Society. So CRS is a company now, like was mentioned earlier, that existed in BC for probably 6 or 7 years, and now for probably a year here in Nova Scotia, and has always taken pride and will always take pride in the fact that we are Indigenous focused and we take on an Indigenous people first approach. So what does that mean? It means that CRS understands the effects that colonialism has had on Indigenous people's ways of life all across Canada. One of the things that we do that reflects that is we ensure that all employment, contract, and training opportunities are provided to Indigenous people first. Some of our goals of our projects are to foster economic development within the communities and support capacity building within Indigenous communities as well. So we also recognize that environmental stewardship has been conducted by First Nations people for millennia, and they are the best positioned to guide, direct, implement, and financially benefit from the growth and the development of the blue-green economy. Next slide, please. Okay, Indigenous focus. So it's really just an extension of what we were just talking about. The foundation of our project, all actions taken, considerations, directions, and prioritized by discussions with Indigenous partners for guidance and input. So we're always seeking input. Examples of some of this input would be seeking out culturally important areas, input on archaeological or culturally significant sites, food harvesting practices of the members, and input on hiring, project design, implementation, in the reporting process. So just adding more to the Indigenous people's first Indigenous focus concept. So even though Coastal Restoration's ownership is not Indigenous, they fully support and encourage these concepts. As mentioned before, CRS completely understands that one group of people that are more equipped to guide, support, and benefit from the blue-green economy are the Indigenous people, who are ultimately the stewards of our land. And if you notice, I've mentioned this already a couple of times in this short presentation, and it's just making a point that we're fully aware of that. So in relation to searching for input in the communities prior to the commencement of any project, be it the input that we talked about, the archaeological or culturally sensitive sites, we do these for obvious reasons, of course. And one example I'll give you right now is for the project here in southwestern Nova Scotia, CRS is and was aware of the sensitive relationships between the Indigenous and the non-Indigenous people regarding the practicing of fish harvesting rights for their members. Excuse me. Particularly in relation to moderate livelihood fishing situation, right? So CRS takes every step necessary and will continue to take every step necessary to make sure the Indigenous harvesters were and are aware that we are aware of the situation, and we are in no way to threat to their harvesting fishing rights. So keeping the communities up to date on the vessels we use, locations of where we're working, what we are working on is paramount for CRS to keep the members understanding that we are no threat to their fishing rights. Next slide, please. Okay, so tracking progress, field work and survey locations. So because the initial surveys by CRS expose a negative footprints that colonial industries have left throughout Nova Scotia, there was lots of work to be done. Here are some of the areas that projected to clean throughout the project in that last summer. So most areas down in southwestern Nova Scotia, you guys are probably quite familiar with this. As far as location goes, most areas we did get a chance to clean in our last project, but because of the workload and the amount of debris that had to be removed, there were some areas that didn't get looked at down in southwestern Nova Scotia. So hopefully they will be, projects for the future. However, in Cape Breton, which was later in this summer, it was a smaller project of only 6 weeks. We did manage to get to the projected areas, so it was very successful. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, Ghost Gear surveys and retrieval down in the South Shore. So training began in late May with 20 participants representing 10 First Nations and 1 council. Another 10 employees participated in the training in mid-June. So we had a total of 30 hired, of which 26 were Indigenous. So before we started training, CRS leadership visited, and this is the ones that we did for every project, or we only did 2, I guess, but we visited all the First Nations who participated to inform them of any of our intentions and to receive any input or guidance that they would offer us in preparation for the project. The hiring process took place in mid-May, included applicants from 10 First Nations and 1 council. The reason why I stress that is because most of you probably know that there's 13 First Nations in Nova Scotia. Everybody was approached or attempted to be approached, and either we never got feedback through numerous attempts, or they come back that they weren't interested. So we did our job to make sure that everybody was aware of what we were doing. So the project started with our 7-day training program. This training ended in early June. One point I would like to note is that the employees were paid full wage while they were in the training. And it's important for us to say that because CRS understands that it would be very difficult for anybody to take 7 days of training without any income. So they were paid full wages right from the beginning. So once the project was up and running, a few weeks later, we hired the other 10 as mentioned, and these new employees represented the same First Nations as I mentioned before. Next slide, please. Okay, so continuing on the Cape Breton area. So in early August, CRS conducted interviews for the Cape Breton project, and hired 6 more Indigenous employees. So once again, I'm going to repeat myself quite a bit here, but we did meet with all the First Nations in Cape Breton to make sure they're fully aware of who we were and our intentions, and to entertain any input and guidance that they had to offer us. So that was a crucial step, and there's a reason why I keep repeating it. It's because we want to make sure the communities are fully aware of everything we do. So I'd like to note that CRS staff performed in this particular job 50 interviews in the Cape Breton area for only 6 positions. Now that was quite different compared to down in southwestern Nova Scotia, because we were at a point we were kind of even wondering if we had enough. So the way I read this and the way CRS reads this is that because of the good work and the positive, the way the project played out down in southwestern Nova Scotia, it spread quite a bit to the Cape Breton area, to the point that we had 50 members applying, and all of them were Indigenous there in Cape Breton. So next slide, please. Okay, so wisdom and traditional practices. So this is an important slide. So throughout the Ghost Gear project, CRS prioritize ensuring Indigenous employees had access to guidance of a local elder so that the connection to their cultural practices and traditional ways was always available to them. So this is something that is very important to us and to me, as it is nested in everything that we do and we will continue to do. And certainly sends a message, hopefully, to the Indigenous communities that CRS is aware of what it takes to, number one, develop a meaningful working relationship with the Indigenous people and the importance of their cultural traditions and practices. So saying that, it is important to make sure our Indigenous employees had access to the wisdom and the guidance of a local elder, ensuring that their connection to their cultural practices and traditional ways was always available. CRS, what we did is then we went out and we contacted our local elder here from Acadia First Nations, and with the guidance of her, we initiated, through her guidance, initiated a few ceremonies and practices that align with our Indigenous employees. So the examples of these initiatives were what in the opening ceremonies, a water ceremony was performed. The opening ceremonies for the onset of the project, that is, a water ceremony was performed and traditional meal was offered. This was hosted by the Acadia First Nations, and it was an important step for our Indigenous employees to know that CRS was very mindful of the importance of the traditions and practices of the Indigenous way of life. So we really wanted right from the onset to make sure that the crew was fully aware that we were serious about their traditions and cultures. So another thing we did, or our elder did, was we had weekly smudgings for our employees, which was really, really, truly appreciated. You know, they always said it was a great way to start the week, a good way to get rid of some of the negative energy that was within them over the previous week. So, and then following that, again, in alignment with culture and traditions, a closing ceremony that brought the project to an end in Yarmouth, or southwestern Nova Scotia, started out with a 4-day burning of a sacred fire, which ended on the day of the closing of the ceremony. The traditional meal was once again offered. So the same approach took place in Cape Breton for the opening and closing of the ceremonies, and the access to the elder for any expressions or concerns that our employees might have had. So, next slide, please. So this is pretty much my last slide, and it's really the current work now. I mean, it's only 1 year in, so CRS is applying for numerous funding opportunities to continue restoration work in providing meaningful employment opportunities in 2024 for our crew and the new crew that will be identified. It's very important that we continue to offer meaningful work for our Indigenous people, and we will continue to seek all the funding opportunities to make sure that that happens. So that brings it to the end for me of this part of portion of the presentation. So thank you so much for your time, and I will now hand it over to Rheanna.
Thank you very much, Earl. Good evening, good afternoon. My name is Rheanna Drennan, and I'm calling in today from the traditional and unceded territories of the Esquimalt and Songhees Nations on Vancouver Island. I am the project lead for the Coastal Restoration Society's Ghost Gear projects, and I have been fortunate to be part of 3 successful Ghost Gear initiatives that have occurred in British Columbia and Nova Scotia. For my portion of the presentation, I'm going to recap on some of the topics Pete and Earl have presented and take people through some of the remarkable successes of this recent Atlantic project. We're very excited to be able to share some of these statistics and highlight the positive impacts this project has had on both the local communities and the individuals involved. So one of the key metrics we are proud to share is the significant number of employment opportunities that this project made available to First Nations and coastal community members. Through all CRS projects, we work diligently to ensure that funding remains in local communities. We achieve this through both direct hires and the allocation of subcontracts. For this project, we are thrilled to report that 63 people were directly hired, and with a significant portion of those being to the First Nations. However, this goes beyond just a number. It's really about creating opportunities for people, for a diverse range of people to work in on these projects. This range of people includes youth, elderly, First Nation members, females, and others not traditionally employed in this space. We also pride ourselves on being equal opportunity employees, and this is employers, and this is what we hold at the forefront of all our projects. Next slide. Another key success metric we measure is the success of those that we work with. As I mentioned, all of our projects, we extend opportunities to those who we extend opportunities to local subcontractors, and we always want to acknowledge and appreciate the work done by them, as they play a pivotal role in the success of our initiatives. And for this project specifically, their dedication was truly commendable. Our work in the Atlantic this past summer actually saw over 100 employment opportunities allocated to local subcontractors. And none of our achievements are ours alone, and they would not be possible without the work that these people did with us. As new kids on the block, we are very thankful to have been able to collaborate with the following subcontractors and organizations. We worked with LFFA 34 Lobster Fishers, Lexus Marine of Yarmouth, Marine Nav of PEI, Mako Dive Team from New Brunswick, and Breton Air of Cape Breton, and the Glooscap Health and Safety Organization. Our commitment to prioritizing local partnerships is extended beyond just rhetoric. As I mentioned, and the guys before me have said, it's a core principle that CRS actively upholds. By working close with partners, we not only strengthen our projects, but also contribute to the growth and sustainability of the local businesses and communities. Partners play a pivotal role in our success, and their dedication to the work was truly commendable. I hope that as we continue to work here, we can all become partners, and that the photo I had on the past slide, that partnership wall will continue to grow. I would like to be able to see members from across the Nova Scotia Environmental Network up there at next year's talk. Next slide. As Cass introduced, I would like to acknowledge that all of this work could not have been made possible without the funding provided by Fisheries and Oceans Canada's Go Skier Fund in response to the Hurricane Fiona. Hurricane Fiona occurred in the fall of 2022 and heavily impacted all coastal communities around the Atlantic region. There was significant damage to local communities, wharves, harbors. There was extensive gear loss, and then this all threatened the livelihoods of local Atlantic communities and people. This fund was set out to provide support for rebuilding, encouraging sustainable practices, and addressing lost gear in the environment. So as part of a $30 million funding envelope, CRS was able to secure funds that made it possible for us to work in this space and have the successes that we all share now. I'd just like to say that we do hold our partnerships as one of our key metrics of success. And we believe that the collaborative partnerships achieved through our Atlantic project are really a testament to the positive change we can bring when we work together. CRS is committed to continuing our efforts to creating opportunities, fostering inclusivity, and contributing to the prosperity of communities and the nations we serve. Next slide. So let me get into some more Atlantic successes. And these are the numbers. These are the stats. This is where it kind of matters. So this past project for this summer, we saw some impressive numbers come up in terms of debris and ghost gear retrieved. Our teams were able to successfully collect approximately 150 tons of debris and ghost gear from both shoreline and marine environments. This included approximately 3,500 lobster traps, 3,100 buoys, 23,000 feet of rope, and just over 1,800 feet of nets. So those are all big numbers, but to put them into perspective, an adult Northern Atlantic right whale weighs approximately 44 to 77 tons. Therefore, this project saw roughly the equivalent of 2 to 3 whales of marine debris removed from the region. If you're a lobster fisher in the room, that's roughly 132,000 medium-sized lobsters worth of debris that were pulled out of the water and off the shores. As for the rope, 23,000 feet of rope is the equivalent of stretching from Yarmouth to Matagan. Next slide. Some of the other key metrics of success that we measure are the end of life and our environmental impact. CRS is committed to environmental sustainability, and this is evident through our end of life processing initiatives. For this project, we were able to work in collaboration with a network of local regional disposal centers that were funded by both the Fishing Gear Coalition of Atlantic Canada and DFO. And for this project, we were able to successfully divert an impressive 85% of all the gear recovered. For this work, our primary goal is to keep ALDFG or ghost gear and other debris out of landfills. By cataloging and processing these items appropriately, we're able to prevent potential breakdowns and re-entries into the ecosystem. This commitment aligns with our broader environmental objectives and underscores the significance of a need for responsible waste management. This approach also to end-of-life processing not only contributes to the environmental sustainability, but is also investing in advancements of recycling and upcycling of previously landfill items to see that the fishing industry moved to more of a circular economy. Part of this process is the sorting. Field technicians play a crucial role in this mission, while they diligently work to sort and clean all debris. This is an ungrateful process, but in the end, it ensures that all items are cataloged before being transported to their respective facilities. The cataloging is a critical step in our end-of-life processing. It not only allows us to maintain an organized record of the recovered items, but also ensures that local facilities can accept the debris. This is particularly vital for facilities that lack the capacity to sort and clean on site, and as such would be unable to accept items that were mixed or dirty. Next slide. Another key initiative and success from this project was our data sharing initiatives. In our collaborative efforts, data sharing plays a pivotal role. One of the key partners that we were able to work with and share data and information with is a well-known Nova Scotian cleanup organization, Scotian Shores, who has been working in the ghost gear area to collect ghost gear from the local shorelines using a broad group of volunteers. Scotian Shores actively maintains records on all of their cleanup activities and then compiles all other activities for the area. Our work was benefited from them, from their local knowledge, from their information on how to process, how to sort, and how to dismantle traps. And as such, we were able to more effectively break down and process the gear that we retrieved. And they were willing to take all our figures and information and share it broadly in some of their publications. We also had a few other partners that we work with to share data. One of the most important is DFO. Using the fishing gear reporting system produced by DFO, this is where we were able to track gear that is reported lost, and then also if it's subsequently recovered. Following Hurricane Fiona, this was instrumental to understand where gear had been lost and where it possibly might be as we began our project. Reporting where it's found is an ability for DFO to then understand areas of debris migration or areas that have previously been surveyed. We also worked with our First Nation partners. We are honored to work closely with these nations, and as such, our effort to ensure that they are fully aware and empowered by our work is to provide them with comprehensive information on the success of the project and all debris that comes out of their area. This ensures that we are able to protect their Indigenous sovereignty over their lands and their data. And last, We were able to join organizations such as this and the Fishing Gear Coalition of Atlantic Canada. CRS actively seeks out to partner with networks and organizations of others working in this sphere. And for this project, we were able to support the Fishing Gear Coalition of Atlantic Canada in their ambitious goal of 500 tons of ghost gear. Working with the First Nations partners, our subcontractors and employees, we were able to help the Fishing Gear Coalition of Atlantic Canada reach their targets. In conclusion, some of these key metrics of success are really only about how the project is, not only really about how the project looks, but it's also about supporting the environmental sustainability. And it all kind of funnels into the fact that we couldn't do this work without each other. Therefore, by collaborating, by leveraging technology, fostering partnerships, and setting ambitious goals, we're able to make an impact in the impact on marine debris. We're hoping that we're able to continue working in this space as we're dedicated to these efforts and to see a cleaner and healthier Atlantic marine system. Next. Now, kind of jumping ahead, those are the successes of this current project, but we want to continue to build on this. As I said, we are committed to being in this space. And we are excited to announce some next steps in our ghost gear detection efforts, where we'll be looking to use the cutting edge AI in collaboration with 2 local Canadian companies, Marine Nav, which specializes in sonar and ROV development, and Ocean AID, which specializes in artificial intelligence and machine learning. We're hoping to work together to revolutionize our approach to identifying and addressing the challenges posed by ghost gear. For our next work, we're hoping to be able to collaborate with GFO on this on this AI project. For those that are not familiar, AI is artificial intelligence, can be thought of teaching a computer a new trick and then letting it practice it until it's really good and can do it basically in its sleep, or in our case, in our sleep. This emerging technology will then allow for real-time detection of ghost gear. And this is where the technology can really take off and support underwater ghost gear identification, gear hotspots, and possible entanglement risks to migrating species. Therefore, our new project has the goal of integrating this technology into our proven methods in order to mitigate the risks to divers, reduce additional gear loss, and address immediate emergency response gear loss. Pete was talking about how we've been able to develop proven successful methods for conducting our work. However, we're continually seeking to improve our methods. And this is a testament to the way that technology can be used to support our efforts and our common goals. As I mentioned, the goals of the project for working with AI will not only be able to identify lost gear, but also tracking the gear migration after storms. And the impacts of Hurricane Fiona have proven that this will be incredibly valuable moving forward. There's a significant amount of debris and gear that was lost, and understanding where this debris ends up will help plan for future retrieval efforts and/or addressing fisheries actions and openings and closures around storm season. So as I said, our partnership with Ocean AID will be particularly exciting as their tool has been proven to support the identification and retrieval of ghost gear. And therefore, we were hoping to be able to integrate this into some of our projects next year, where we will work with Ocean AID and DFO to identify and survey large areas in the Maritimes and Gulf regions. Next slide. Another one of our future plans, as Pete and Earl have both spoken to, when CRS does something, we stick to it. And so now that we're in this space, we're really here for the long haul. So the next plan we've got is to continue working with local networks of nonprofits and others in this space and support collaborative initiatives outside of funding opportunities in order to be able to strengthen our information, knowledge sharing, and understanding of the problem. So CRS is happy to be able to support the Fishing Gear Coalition of Atlantic Canada in launching their hotspot mapping task force. Staff from CRS will be working with the team from the Fishing Gear Coalition of Atlantic Canada and its members to help understand the geographic scope and scale of ghost gear throughout Nova Scotia. Our objectives for this task force will be able to share best practices on hotspot mapping and gear retrieval tools and techniques amongst ourselves and out to the broader community. We also hope to be able to share resources to expand and increase our organizations and our project impacts. And we're also hoping to be able to collaborate on initiatives to reduce gear loss at sea, such as gear marking and or retrieval programs. We are committed to continuing to work with the people and the partners we've established and hoping that this work can continue, calling for action letters and support from local governments, federal governments, and the greater communities beyond, such as international organizations. CRS is hoping to be a voice amongst others to see that this project and others like it continue. Next slide. And moving towards the future. And as I just mentioned, there's a bit of a bigger picture here. At CRS, we're dedicated to, our dedication transcends the individual projects we work on. We're actively engaged in provincial and federal clean ocean strategies. We strive to mitigate ocean plastics and bolster the blue economy. Our steadfast commitment ensures that our collective efforts align seamlessly with broader environmental objectives. In all our CRS projects, we continue to adhere to a foundational approach that emphasizes our First Nations First policy, local hiring, comprehensive training, and capacity building for a diverse workforce. Our unwavering commitment to long-term partnerships and collaboration has not only proven pivotal in our own project success, but is also shown to be transferable, scalable, and poised to be the cornerstone of future government initiatives. We're seeing this success in growing our connections with partners and organizations across Canada and beyond. We are hoping that our projects and the policies and practices that we implement are able to be uptaken by other organizations and help bolster the blue-green economy as it continues to grow. And then I have one more slide. All right. I also wanted to touch on something that we don't generally report out on, and it's not necessarily considered a metric, but it is really a key success of all projects. And this is really the human element. Our collective efforts, partnerships, and technological advancements ultimately serve a higher purpose. It's really the well-being of our oceans, marine life, and the communities depend on them. Therefore, we look forward to being able to continue to foster connections between the people from diverse backgrounds and geographic locations, because we recognize that when we come together, this is where we are at our best. When we're able to ensure that all people working on these projects feel connected and acknowledged, they are able to work towards a common goal. The people in this picture didn't necessarily know each other prior to this project, but by the end, I bet every single one of them would say they were a friend or they would continue to maintain their relationships. And I think this is the key to all of their success, is really having the support of everybody on the project, knowing they have your back and they're willing to continue working together for a common goal. All right, next slide. Thank you. Hoping we were able to continue working together, and I'm happy to meet with everyone, and hopefully we'll see all of you out there on the water. I can pass it back over now to Cass and open the floor to questions and answers.
Thanks, Rheanna, and thank you, Earl and Pete, as well, for your piece of the presentation. I thought it was super interesting. I really loved the focus on partnership and collaboration and knowledge and information sharing. So that was probably my favorite part of your guys' work. But yeah, the floor is open to questions. So feel free to either raise your hand or put your question in the chat. So we've got a question from Lisa. It says, did you only remove fishing gear or other debris as well?
I can take that one. Our field techs don't leave any type of debris behind. All of it obviously has an impact on our environments. So while we do focus on getting out ghost gear, and that is other types, and that is concentrated around fishing gear, we also don't leave behind, like I said, we don't leave behind this sort of gear. And so we were able to also bring out items that were part of that 15% that was landfilled. So things like tires, just general anthropogenic debris. I recall working in the field one day and we took out a lot of bottles, just pop bottles and other sorts of plastic.
Thanks, Rheanna. We have another question for the team. It's from Wendy. She says, will the Northumberland shore hit hard by Fiona be considered in the future?
Happy to jump in here too. Yeah, as I said, we do have some projects we're currently working on, but through the partnerships that we have and our outreach and engagement with locals, we are hoping to find out more information on areas. As we came onto the scene, we were a bit new and we were only aware of kind of what was well known, what was available to us through the DFO fishing gear reporting system or through our partnerships with First Nations. So as we work to learn about the environment more, understand more about the dynamics of the marine environment and how these storms are impacting areas, we will hope to be able to expand to all these other areas.
Thanks, Rheanna. Any other questions? Oh, we've got another one from Lisa. She says, what percentage of lost fishing gear from Fiona do you think you were able to remove?
I don't know if you'd have a number for that, Rheanna. This is Earl.
Mm.
That would be very tough to say. I mean, our numbers were impressive, but there was a lot of gear loss. So, but it would be a really, really rough guess. It wouldn't almost be impossible to guess, really.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have metrics around tagged gear. So we understand when the gear was tagged, when the tags were provided. Obviously, gear that might have come from the early 2000s, we did find some of that. You would assume that that's been out there a little bit longer given the condition of it. But some of that newer gear, things that were lost in the last year that were still in great condition, these are probably some of the items that would have been affected by Fiona had they been out there, because they didn't show kind of the general wear and tear that might have led to other sort of reasons that they might have naturally been lost.
I can say that a lot of the areas we were at and we're specifically targeting were areas that had never really been cleaned up. So there was an accumulation of years and years and years of material there.
Thanks both. We have another question from Anne. She says, as well as removing debris, derelict vessels, and invasive species, are there other aspects to environmental remediation that you might do in the future?
I can say this, that a couple of our initiatives now that we're working with the Indigenous communities, it focuses on inland cleanup as well. So we could actually look at buildings if they wish to have demolished or taken down, right? So yes, we certainly do more than just the shoreline cleanup.
Go ahead, Pete.
I was going to say a big future focus, hopefully we'll be working more and more closely with the Indigenous Guardian programs, which have, a multitude of different elements, depending on where the community is and what their priorities are. And so, opportunities for training, skill development, capacity building with the Guardian programs, has a lot of potential and interest to expand that, so that the people, can take on more and more projects locally themselves.
Yeah, and I would also just add to that, that a number of our projects around invasive species, derelict vessels, and our Pacific Ghost Gear projects, we've really been working to incorporate the Guardians and also environmental monitoring, understanding that all of these things have a huge impact on the environments and the species there. We want to be able to assess accurately the impact before we go into a project, before it's a removal, before there's trapping initiatives, and then also throughout the project and afterwards. So in the last year in the Pacific, we were able to do some environmental monitoring and documenting of sensitive habitat for some of the coastal Indigenous groups we worked with, and being able to see where eelgrass beds were, understanding where salmon habitat is, and then see what the debris is and how it's impacting those areas. And then another kind of area that CRS has been able to work in was again land-based. CRS had a large project where they were able to support the provincial government addressing a significant environmental issue or significant environmental event. I'm not sure how many people in Nova Scotia are familiar, but we had our own natural disaster a few years ago when we had an atmospheric river come through BC and wipe out significant areas along the Fraser River, including most of the transportation corridors. It saw large sections of homes, communities, and hillsides move into the river and then be washed away. CRS was called in based on the work that we do in debris cleanups, environmental remediation, and we were able to work with the nations there through hiring and direct partnerships to be able to clean up and remove some of the debris from their territories. So CRS is able to kind of take from that the training we were able to provide with people and the skills we learned there is also now being a bit more proactive. We're seeking and kind of looking towards being more in the sphere of climate change response and emergency response. So looking at things such as oil spills, container spills, other things like that are where our crews are now being trained and poised to be able to support.
All right, we are at 7:59, so I think I'll call it there. If anybody does have any questions for CRS, in the follow-up email, I'll provide an email contact for anybody who wants to get in touch and discuss these issues further. So I just want to thank you again, Coastal Restoration Society, for being here tonight and hosting such an interesting presentation. And thank you to everyone who attended as well. So a recording of the webinar will be emailed to everybody who registered if you'd like to rewatch or catch up if you joined a little bit late. The email will also include links to donate or become an NSEN member if you'd like to support our work or get more involved. And if you aren't already subscribed to our monthly environmental newsletter, you can sign up for free on our website. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Cass.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.